And is that okay with you if we record?
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. We will get started in just a few seconds here as we welcome more of you onto the webinar. Good to see you, Pauline, also Liz. I mentioned a couple names because people have asked me, can you tell that I'm on? Do you know that I've attended the webinars? Yes, I do. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the third Lunch and Learn of 2023. I'm really excited today to introduce you to Dr. Eric Storch, a new friend, acquaintance of mine, but one of my favorite people. Eric Storch is a member of the board of directors of Love for Lawrence. He is professor, vice chair, and McIngvale Presidential Endowed Chair in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Baylor College of Medicine. That's a mouthful. That's a lot. What a great institution, Baylor College of Medicine out in Texas, in Waco, Texas. Dr. Storch specializes in the nature and treatment of childhood and adult obsessive compulsive disorders, anxiety disorders, misophonia. Did I say that?
Yeah, close enough. Yeah.
Close enough. Okay. See why I love him so much? And anxiety among youth with autism. In addition to 850 plus published articles and chapters in 22 books, he has received multiple federal grants to investigate treatment, efficiency, mechanisms of action, genetics, innovative approaches to phenotyping, and how to enhance outcomes for those struggling with OCD and related conditions. So before we get started, I do want to thank Crown Automotive. They are our, oops, let me get that on here correctly. There we go. Crown Automotive. They are our sponsors for all of our Lunch and Learns, and we are thrilled about that, and we thank them for their sponsorship. And now I'm going to turn over the reins, so to speak, to Dr. Storch.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and no pressure, but feel free to turn on cameras so I don't have to be reminded that I look like my dad, who's unfortunately not Richard Gere. Brad Pitt.
Well, unfortunately, they can't turn on their cameras.
Oh,
so
man,
there,
so I'm gonna have to keep staring.
Yeah, you can't see them.
Okay, well, unlucky for me then on that case, but thanks so much for joining. And I have this unique role where I end up working at Baylor in Houston, but then also split time living here in Tampa as well. So kind of straddle both of those worlds. So very happy to be back with the sunshine. Now, here's sort of the clincher, and then maybe call it a day. But mental health of our kids stinks right now, and it's gotten worse for a variety of reasons. So there's kind of the punchline, but we'll talk a little bit about sort of what's the status of things, and then what are some of the things that we can do about it, and in particular, what are some of the pressures that we might want to think about in the state of Florida, where the reality is it ain't going so well. So I think more space here. So we'll hit on different numbers, and also some of the why behind this, which I think is a critical piece to it, and then of course what can we do here? All right. So from a numbers standpoint, behavioral health stuff is concerning, and it's getting worse and worse over time. Now there are a whole bunch of reasons for this, and we can conveniently blame social media, we can blame all sorts of things, but in general it is getting worse. We see about 15% of our kids struggling with significant depression, and then another 10 or 15% with anxiety as well. We also see this massive treatment access gap. So Florida right now, if you're a depressed child or teenager, about 70% of the time you get absolutely nothing. And a significant proportion of the time, those that do get something get the wrong thing. So if you think about this from the standpoint of of, hey, you got cancer, and you go to your doctor and your doctor gives you the wrong treatment. Like, this is appalling. And that's one of the biggest issues that really is plaguing our mental health system, is both access, trained workforce, and then our third is really access to the right type of intervention. And that's something my group has spent the last 20 plus years working on, starting when I was about 7 years old. As an aside too, I always point out, like Texas and Florida, I think we tend to beat Mississippi, but that's about it. So it's pretty dire straits. Now, when we think about, just what's happened over time, the data suggests that these concerns are getting worse. And it's not that we're just monitoring it better. It's that they are in fact getting worse. And there's some thoughts that I'll hit on in a moment about why they might be getting worse. But in general, what we're seeing is a gradual increase. We also see a couple different groups that are potentially at greater risk. So one of them include, just from a gender standpoint, females more than males. We see individuals of Black or African American ancestry at greater risk that relative to just males in general. And then we see those that identify as LGBTQ as being at a particularly elevated risk. Now, these data were from a couple of years ago, and my sense is that if we surveyed this again, we would see these rates even increase. My other sense is that some of this might even be moderated or modified by location, where I think there's some areas that are much more accessible or accepting, accepting of individuals of different race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and identity than others, which then exerts increased pressure. So bottom line is different risk groups getting worse, and we need to be mindful of that. Now, if we think about from a broad standpoint, what we're talking about is 20% of kids will meet criteria for some disorder if we assessed it. And this has remained pretty stable over time, although slight increases, particularly in that adolescent cohort, as well as that kind of, tween cohort as well. This stays relatively stable throughout adulthood, that 20% 1 in 5 ratio. And then there are a lot of people who sort of have these subclinical type symptoms that can be impactful, and sort of like running a marathon with ankle weights on. You can do it, but you're not going to be at your best. So again, lots of concerns. One of the journals that likes to reject my work published a great paper, and what they typically do is they'll rank the top 10 causes of disability among kids. And so what was really impactful is that one of the more recent issues showed that 5 of the top 10 causes of disability were behavioral health related. That's amazing if we think about this. Literally 5 of the top 10 causes of disability among our youth are focused on kind of psych. And so it speaks to the need to really invest resources in capturing these problems early, being really open about talking about them, and then effectively intervening as early as possible. So we've sort of hit on this, and it gives some proportion. I mean, think about your kid's class. My youngest daughter has 25 in her class. So what are we talking about? I mean, 5 of those kids have some sort of diagnosis. I think that's incredible. And again, we need, I think if we scratch more, we might even see a little bit more pain. So crisis is real. And we've seen this increase in experiences of depression, and we've seen that get worse throughout COVID for a number of reasons. What we've also seen, though, are some good and some bad aspects. So here's a good thing, because I don't want to be all doom and gloom. That's not my personality at all. But our kids are actually getting pregnant less. That's a good thing, I think, especially because I have a teenage daughter. I think another is there's a little bit less drug use than there was some years ago. There's less smoking than there was in the past. So these are really great outcomes. The same time, we're seeing elevations in self-harm, non-suicidal self-injury. We're seeing elevations in suicide, both in terms of ideation as well as actual plans and attempts. There's some suggestion that the lethality of our kids' attempts, is even more lethal. And some of that is access to weapons that have a much higher, I hate to use the word success in this regard, but success rate at accomplishing suicide. And so these are things that have been trending positive and have continued to trend positive over the last couple of years. Now we see this reflect, across the nation. So this isn't just Florida; it's everywhere. And we're seeing that emergency department visits have continued to escalate beyond these data from 2015, secondary to those suicide attempts. And this stat is incredibly concerning, that about 16% of our kids are thinking about suicide, beyond the point of, it'd be better off if I weren't here. So we're at this point now where, we're pretty much out of the pandemic, but I think some of the ill effects are still being seen. And little itty bitties who never learned to read, that has resulted in kind of compounded problems, and then some of the delay associated with that lag in terms of self-esteem, ability to cope, and so on. I think we've had a host of kids who lost people that were close to them and are experiencing trauma and grief at play. We've seen an increase in anxiety as well as depressive disorders on top of that. And so a lot of these effects are really fully appreciated in individuals that either experience loss or have a number of other kind of adverse life experiences that are really kind of weighing them down too. And then on top of that, we ended up seeing greater rates of depression. We saw sleep quality get worse. We also saw things like coping become more and more problematic as kids were kind of locked up by themselves, and are only now kind of reintroducing them. Anyone who works with college kids sees this, or many of my employees are right out of college, and it's sometimes half funny, half infuriating, at some of the things you have to kind of re-socialize into people getting their first job when they finished up school in an online capacity in many cases. And then, when we think about some of our younger kids, especially during that lockdown, we ended up seeing these heightened levels of depression and anxiety, as I mentioned. Now, one of the challenges to this is that this stuff just doesn't go away. So when you think about, what some of the mechanisms behind stuff like anxiety or depression or loneliness, there's a very clear behavioral mechanism takes place. Like when you're anxious, you start avoiding things that make you uncomfortable. The more you avoid those things that make you uncomfortable, the stuff you're afraid of doesn't happen and you feel better. But that makes you more likely to avoid it at the same time. Or in depression, one of the things that happens is when people get in a funk, they start withdrawing from their life. The more they withdraw, the more they end up, feeling worse about that, which makes it even harder to have further engage. And so those patterns of behavior become more ingrained and then persist over time. And so that's why in a lot of these conditions, we end up seeing kind of this, gradual escalation of problems that can run like a stock market with highs and lows, but slopes positive in terms of getting worse and worse over time, unless we do something to be effective about intervening. And these just sort of hammer home that point of again, like a lot of sadness, a lot of grief for kids that have persist. I mentioned earlier that ER visits are one indication of mental health, but a higher kind of acuity of mental health. And so among adolescent girls, we are seeing much elevated rates of emergency department visits secondary to suicide attempts or serious self-injury. Now, I always think about the why behind this. Well, it's a harder, more complicated world, I think now. And so I think this exerts some stressors. There are a number of different kind of biological explanations that are just kind of programmed into us. One of my projects, which is one that I love, is this one where we're looking at genetics of OCD among individuals who are Latin American. And so I put together this consortium of about 50 sites in 14 countries where we're doing this science, and we're building out, how do we treat OCD in Bolivia, which I can tell you, there's no one that treats OCD in Bolivia, but there will be soon. And so this is all super cool, but that genetic piece is real. There's higher incidence of problems in individuals who have someone who has a behavioral health problem. Okay, I mean, we know that about lots of different problems. And why would mental health be any different? So that tells us something. And the more that we understand the various loading, the more effective we'll be at intervening and figuring out what to do. But there's a lot of other stuff that comes into play. Adverse childhood experiences are huge. And, we think about, let's take Florida and Texas, and then let's take the nation or the world. I mean, the world dealt with COVID. We lost 1 million people plus. That's a lot of people that left behind people who love them. Like, this is rough. In Florida, we're coming into our hurricane season. And anyone that's experienced a really significant hurricane knows how difficult and traumatizing that can be if you're flooded out of your home or you leave, your pet. And that's not to mention, the multiple stressors that are taking place in our world, in terms of, issues like, poverty, race, stigmatization on top of stuff. When we moved to Houston initially, one of the challenges was we moved right after Hurricane Harvey. And so people were struggling with losing their homes and being flooded, trying to return, and so on. And so these were a number of factors that contribute to how kids are adjusting and coping with life. Now, we've passed through social isolation with COVID, which has been incredible, I think, for both us as adults, but especially as kids, purpose of the topic. But that, for a while was really, really impactful. And then there are others, kind of stuff that's, just challenges of childhood, dealing with, families that end up splitting up, dealing with peers that are rough. And, when I was a kid, you might get bullied, but you knew when you went home, like, all right, you're home. Here, it's never ending, with social media, and there are very few boundaries that really sort of take place. And so I think a lot of these factors are really kind of relevant as potential risk factors here. Now, when we think about why, this is kind of near and dear. It's not, mental health is not something people grow out of. It's not something we should, poo-poo away at all. I think that's, probably a pretty accepting remark, with this audience, but it's something that's really serious. Whenever we write a grant, what you have to do is hammer home on the significance first. Like, why should we care? Well, here's why. If we don't touch mental health, what we see are increased rates of suicide, depression, school functioning, in terms of tardiness, as well as impact on family. I do a lot of work with individuals with OCD, and so we see people, family members, taking on their child's burden because of their OCD. And so these are really some kind of challenging aspects that we see increases in with unchecked mental health problems. The flip side, we see school performance going down, increased health utilization, as well as negative health outcomes like less exercise, more sedentary activity, more kind of being glued to social media. Behavioral health problems are not just like categories. So you're not just depressed, you're not just anxious, but rather it's like a big old circle, and then lots of Venn diagrams within there. So depressed folks and kids are often anxious kids as well. They're often pretty irritable too on top of that, and more likely to use substance use. So all these things kind of co-occur, and again, unchecked, little problems become bigger problems over time. And then other stuff like, how do you connect and build relationships? I was talking to my daughter about, that middle school is sort of like your audition for high school. And, boy, if you're, losing out on those various time points, auditioning for high school or high school to get ready for college, this makes it really hard to thrive in those next environments. And so again, things that we need to do about this. So why? Well, here's why not. Kids aren't worse than they were when we were kids. In fact, I sort of think they're better. COVID made it worse, but it wasn't the only thing. It's not because we're willing to talk about it at all. Like talking about it doesn't cause problems. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this, and it's one of these like, smack your head things, which apparently when you have a forehead as big as mine can be even dangerous on that. But it's like, this is talking about it doesn't cause problems. It actually alleviates problems. So we know this is not what's happening. But here's some things that I think do matter. I think social media is pretty rough. And whether it's suggesting this is what you should look like, or this is how you should be, whether it's just losing out on opportunities, which I think is a huge one. As kids are glued in, they're losing out on opportunities to learn how to engage with their friends, with their family, or receive the support of people like friends and family in a more qualitatively meaningful way. I think now our kids are sort of struggling to develop their life skills. When my eldest is going to Dominican Republic for their kind of graduating trip, and I'm on a WhatsApp thread, and it cracks me up, like the stuff that's being on there. Well, you have to have them bring toilet paper, this, that, and the other. And I can reflect back when I was a kid, like I would have been able to go to DR. But I can tell you, my parents never sent me with toilet paper anywhere, because their response would have been, figure it out, buddy. There's some leaves over there. And so like, and I'm not suggesting you should use leaves, at least often, but what I'm sort of suggesting is that engender this problem-solving spirit for dealing with a difficult situation, and being able to kind of come into contact with a number of different situations, and then figure out how to effectively deal with that. There are other things too. I think that matter. I do think, as I mentioned earlier, it's a more stressful time. There's more divisiveness in our society than I remember during my adult life. And I think our kids experience that. I think if you're in a group that is not a majority, it's probably a little bit more salient, or a lot more salient. And so I think these are some concerns that we really have to think about, the effect that that's having on those that are most vulnerable. I think that's going to be a really difficult position that we find ourselves in for some of the choices that we're making as a society. So what can we do? Well, we can make better choices as a society. I like that. But I think some of that goes to, how do we create a positive environment here? Speak up. Some of the foundation's work on mental health first aid is an outstanding example of this. How do we teach people to speak up when they say something? How do we teach people to just talk about this and be more open about it? I was flying recently, and there was someone who was next to me at the sink who clearly had OCD. The way they were washing their hands, was indicative, and that's one of many types of OCD. And so I just said, hey, this is actually what I do. Here's my card. Feel free to shoot me an email. And so about 24 hours later, I get an email and I connect with services. And it wasn't, pushy, but it was a moment of speaking up and saying, hey, I see something. Can I help you? And hopefully this will change his life. But I think the more that we're able to do that with our kids, the better. Teachers are in a perfect position to do this and do a heroic job in this effort. And so, we need to make it easy for them. We need to give them options, as well as guidance counselors and other school personnel in that space, as well as people who interact with kids. Now, this is one model that I'm working on with a brilliant colleague, Allison Salome, at University of South Florida, as well as some folks up in University of Illinois. But what the Journey of Hope model does is it's a school-based intervention that really is all about kind of teaching coping strategies related to negative affect. It's totally benign, integrated within the school, and really a lovely, lovely kind of model for helping kids deal with different, challenges. And so we were awarded a grant from NIH to look at this in several at-risk schools in Florida, as well as in the Houston area. And so these are just some of the core ideas about emotion recognition and then associated coping strategies. And then these are just some, very nice, kind of resources of helpful. And of course, I'm happy to share the slides or starting to share the slides or whatever to get those more. Now, the reality is the more that we prevent problems, the better off we are. But that isn't going to be our immediate reality. So what can we do? Well, there's different types of psychotherapeutic services that can be very helpful. There's other types of kind of behavioral or psychiatric intervention outside of psychotherapy, that include psychiatry. At Baylor, we end up doing a lot of different studies, and one of the things I love about it is the availability to kind of provide free treatment in the context of helping. So one of my projects that I love is a study where we're looking at, can we treat kids with OCD who are on an antidepressant? If we treat them with cognitive behavioral therapy, can we get them to be able to reduce or stop their medication? And so it's a placebo-controlled study where half the kids, everyone gets treatment, and then half the kids withdraw their medicine, and then half remain on it in a blinded fashion. So they don't know, and I don't know, our pharmacy knows. But this is massively impactful because we have no way of saying to a family when they start a medicine, here's the evidence that says you can stop it. And so this study will address that gap. And so today I just got a referral from someone that has no insurance, and I'm able to say, don't sweat it. We got you. Here's gold standard free treatment. And so we have a number of projects that we do that really focus on that domain. Now, if we think about the cognitive behavioral therapy model, this is one that's sort of intuitive, but it goes back to an earlier comment where, we know what works, but now it's about, can we do what works and get it out to the masses? And so this is something that actually the field of psychology and psychiatry has lagged on. There's tremendous and unfortunate variation in care where you can go to person A or mental health provider B and get the exact opposite treatment for the exact same problem. That's unacceptable. And if you went to your cardiologist and that happened, you'd talk to a lawyer shortly after and sort that out pretty quickly. But that's one of the things that is really an issue in our field and something that's hoping to improve over time. And the cognitive behavioral therapy model is at the hallmark of many of our evidence-based interventions for childhood and adult psychological problems. And it all taps into the interplay between the way you see things and how you feel about stuff, and then how that drives your behavior. And so I always give the picture behind me as an example, and I'll ask folks, what do they see? And feel free to include in the chat. But I'm always amazed at what people will comment on. And some people will say plugs, some will say faces. Someone said Legos the other day. Someone said teeth, which I think they need to visit the dentist. I didn't really know how to comment on that one. But what it is, it's slums of Rio de Janeiro. So a bunch of favela's. And so I love the painting, but again, that interpretation of the stimuli is different for many people. And it's the same stimuli, but it's a different interpretation. And so that's one of the mechanisms that helps us understand why, some people might be anxious or depressed as opposed to not. It's the same world, or the same interactions, but it's how they're seeing it. And that's, again, influenced by multiple factors too. Now, I think it's helpful to look at other models. And so if we take Texas for one example, and Texas looked at Massachusetts. So if you've ever seen Texas, it's massive. There's always sort of talk of succession, which seems, I don't know, it just seems hysterical. But I will say there's lots of positives about Texas. One of them is cowboy boots. I'm in general 6 feet, which is pretty tall. But with cowboy boots, I'm a solid like 6'2". So like, it's like high heels for men. It's just one example. But I could go on and on about that. But what we were appreciating in the state was that it was really, really hard for kids to get access to psychiatric care. And one of the challenges, was access. Another one of our challenges was not enough workforce. And then a third was that there's places like Houston that are very dense, or Dallas, or Austin, or San Antonio. But then there's all these rural areas that, you won't have a psychiatrist, psychologist anywhere in that area. So we came up with a bunch of different initiatives. And some of this looked at what's happening in Massachusetts, which has really been a leader. And so I think this is sort of propelling Texas forward out of those kind of dismal rankings into much better places. But one of those programs is about T-Chat. And so T-Chat is all about telepsych interventions directly into the school for relatively short term. And so the targets are identifying kids who have significant problems, connecting them with school counselors who then can refer them for help, because those school counselors are usually way overwhelmed. And then giving short-term support and resource kind of management and referrals. And it's all free of charge. And so it's really been this elegant method of trying to increase access so that you're catching kids who are struggling before it becomes a more acute problem. Now, another example is something called Child Psychiatry Access Network. And this is a much better name than the Massachusetts version, which is like MCPAT, which is just, they need, to go in acronym finder to get a better one there. But Florida has something that seems to be similar to this, based out of USF. And so the idea to it is that pediatricians can actually do not surprisingly, can do a lot of good as a first line kind of intervention for more straightforward problems, like kids who are depressed, kids who mild depression or mild anxiety or disruptive behavior, ADHD. But what you also see is a lot of pediatricians are sort of reluctant to do stuff like prescribe or get involved in the behavioral health piece. So literally, we have psychiatrists that are available during work hours. Within 4 minutes is our average response time for a pediatrician to call up and say, "Hey, I got a kid with this problem. What do you think I should do?" And it's not about pushing medications. It's about providing evidence-based recommendations, which could include connecting them to T-Chat or other services in the area. And so this map just shows how many counties in Texas don't have a psychiatrist, and really that need. And so this has been something that's been massive. Now, when I looked on the website at USF, what we saw were that since 2018, 400 calls came in. In Texas, we'll have that in a month. And there's similarly, they're both populous states, so it definitely something that requires resources to really be invested to make it effective. And then workforce development. This is one of the areas that's really near and dear to my heart. If we don't have enough people, that's one problem, and that's currently a problem here in Florida. But it's another problem if the people we have aren't adequately trained to do the work that we need them to do. So we're investing a lot in how do we develop out our workforce. So some of that is generating new providers and new training programs. Some of that is developing new graduate programs. So I, figured out a way to develop a placement in our pre-doctoral internship at the local sheriff's department for first responders. And we developed out a couple lines to provide free treatment to individuals that don't have insurance at all. And so we're really proud of those opportunities. But the whole idea is to be able to catch things early and provide effective, robust intervention. And then that learning collaborative point is something that's really core to kind of my belief system is, hey, we know what works. Let's do it. I remember getting a call from NIH about a grant we submitted, and they're like, yeah, we got to talk. And so basically they're like, yeah, this grant's a good idea. I think they also said something like, you're really good looking, Storch, but they said, we're not going to fund this. And we're not going to fund this because you're saying, let's test treatment A to treatment B. We know this. We want to know why it works or how do we get it out to everyone. And so that was really telling to me of the state of the literature. We're at that point of knowing why it works. Now we need everyone to do it the same way that we would expect a lack of variation in care in other types of medical disciplines. That's the expectation that I have in psych. So here's where we're at. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, let's reorder that. The bad, the good, and the ugly, maybe. So that is, there's a crisis in our kids' mental health. That's clear. And it's not getting better post-COVID. It's, I think, getting worse on this. The good is that we've identified the problem. We, collectively as a society are working on it, and there are impressive initiatives here in Florida, some through Love for Lawrence, some through other kind of entities, like Directions, like USF, as well as other institutions throughout the state. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. And there's a lot in the way of resources that need to be done so that we're able to really effectively intervene and prevent this escalation and suicide taking place. We know what to do. Now the work is how do we get it out there? And I think that's one of the areas that really is going to be a core focus of what what we need to do in Florida and beyond. Now, I want to say thank you. Listening to me for 38 minutes is difficult, as my wife can vouch for. But this is a delight. I include my email here. It's so important for me to be kind of connected with a community, and as I mentioned, one of my loves is being able to provide resources for those that need help, whether it's direction or actual service. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out, shoot me an email. All I do now is email and Zoom, so it'll just fit right into that schedule. But yeah, thanks.
Dr. Storch, thank you so much. And I'd like to invite anyone who has a question to go ahead and type that in the Q&A box so we can address those. But going back to the USF program for pediatricians, how would a pediatrician access that?
Yeah, good question. Let's see this together. I'm going to click the link and let's see what it brings us to. Okay, it says, not going to judge that. It said, do you really want to click that link? All right, there is a phone number, which I'm going to put in the chat for everyone, which is 866-487-9507. Now, I will, and I'll put this in here too. I did not call that number, so if it doesn't work, and we'll say my hypothesis is that that the website wasn't updated, because it's been 5 years. It's got to be more than that. But yeah, but this is a really cool opportunity, and here's a PDF too. I'm just going nuts with this. but it's a very similar model as what what we're doing in CPAN. Really kind of again supporting pediatricians, in how to help kids on the front lines, thereby increasing access to psych services.
Fantastic. And let me remind those of you who are participating, if you're going to download that that PDF, you need to do it before the webinar is over, or it will disappear with the chat box. And be sure you write down that number, 866-487-9507. Very good. Let's see, we do have well, it's not a question, it's a thank you. It's a thank you to you. So there you go. Fascinating. I want to add something myself, and that is that there is more hope to come. As interesting as Dr. Storch's presentation was today, at the start of it, boy, there was a lot of information about where we are now and the decline of the mental health of our young people, our children and youth. And Dr. Storch, if you wouldn't mind turning the host capabilities back over to me, I'd like to share a slide, a teaser with all of you for next month, because there's more good news, there's more hope for recovery and for treatment of our young people. There we go. There we go. Well, first of all, I'm going to thank once again our sponsors, and that's Crown Automotive Charities and the Hawkins Family Foundation for making these lunch and learns possible. And then I want to tell you about Nikki Stevens. And Nikki is with Directions for Living. There you go. Whoops, now it's back again. There we go. Nikki Stevens with, Directions for Living. She is with Champions for Children in Tampa, but she's also a certified hope trainer. There is a program out of Tufts Medical Center, and Nikki is going to talk with us next month, and that's on June 22nd during an interactive workshop. Her title is The 4 Building Blocks of Hope. Dr. Storch today talked a little bit about adverse childhood experiences. Whether they are intentional or completely unavoidable, we've all had them. And so the 4 building blocks of hope are positive childhood experiences that will mitigate the effects of these adverse experiences. So you will learn how to use these 4 building blocks of hope to support the children and youth that are in your life, and that's next month. So a MailChimp piece will go out, and if you don't subscribe to our MailChimp, you can go to loveforlawrence.org and get on our mailing list. You can also join the Love for Lawrence Instagram followers, and you will receive a lot of information about next month's Lunch and Learn. So Dr. Storch, thank you so very much. We appreciate your time today and sharing with us. And I'm just thrilled that we're going to be able to continue what you've introduced us to next month with Nikki Daniels.
Completely my pleasure. And again, folks, don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything I can ever do. And thank you so much for the chance to talk, and really for all the incredible work that you do. And I know many on this call also do to support individuals' mental health. So it's really a privilege and honor.
Thank you. Would you mind telling us your email address again? I don't know if that went in the chat box.
Yeah, super easy. It's eric.storch@bcm, like Baylor College Medicine.edu. And actually, what I put in the chat box.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to those who attended today.
Says I can't chat with everyone. Bummer. Okay. All right. Well, it won't let me chat with everyone. So
okay.
If you use Google, it'll come up.
I'm going to put it in there before, and I know some people have to jump off now, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat box myself.
All right.
Was it Eric Dot or just Eric Storch?
Eric Dot.
At bcm.edu.
Yes.
There it is.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Take care all. Bye.
Bye-bye. TC, Pauline, thank you for being with us today. Melody, Fabiola, Susan. I'm going to stay on for just another couple minutes in case anybody has a question in the chat box or the Q&A, and to make sure you get Eric Storch's email address. Thank you for attending.